Okay. Hey, everyone, let's do it. Um, what I want to do today is I want to take just a couple of minutes, right? And I want to do something important. Today, we're going to do a book review. It's going to be a double header. We're going to talk about two books. We're going to talk about this book by Matthew Lohmeier. It's called Irresistible Revolution. And then we're going to talk about this book by Robert A. Greene Jr., Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines. And there's a reason why we're going to talk about both of them together. And the my short review of these books is go get them, read them both. Okay. I give a full endorsement of both books. I also give a full endorsement of both these guys. And I've never met them in person, but I have communicated with both of them. And in fact, I mean, I think they're both good dudes. I've spoken to both of them on the phone. I've exchanged texts and stuff, emails. With I don't know if I've ever exchanged emails with Matt, but we've spoken on the phone. We've exchanged texts. Rob, I've had more contact with, and Rob actually asked me to write a review. So I received an advanced copy of Rob's book, wrote a review for it, and I will link that review that I have written down in the show notes, and you can check that out as well. But today I just kind of wanted to speak about each book, but I wanted to talk about both of them together because I think they complement the two books complement one another extremely well. And I think if you're someone who is in the military, you have been in the military, like maybe you're retired or maybe you recently separated, maybe you were discharged, kind of against your will, whatever. Or maybe you have a spouse, a sibling, a son or daughter who is in the military, then I think this book is for you. If you are in Congress and you want to know what is going on in our military today, you need to read these books, both of them, you know? So let's talk about this book first. It came out first. So this book was published in May of 2021. I heard about this book in May of 2021 as it was coming out. I was still in Kansas at the time, but I was finishing up at the School of Advanced Military Studies at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and I was moving to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to take command of the battalion right in that time period. And so I heard about the book. I can't remember exactly when I bought the copy of the book, but I remember as soon as I heard about it, I was like, I gotta get that book. Now, Matt's an interesting fellow, and I like Matt a lot. I think he's great. I think he and I have a similar background in a lot of ways, just our background, our upbringing, and then he's an Air Force Academy guy. I'm a West Point guy. He went into the Air Force. I went to the Army. I just mentioned that I was a graduate of the School of Advanced Military Studies. I'm almost positive that he's a graduate of what's called SAS, which is the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies, I believe. SAASS, I think, is the acronym. But I'm not an Air Force guy, right? But I think it's the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies, which would be their SAM's equivalent. So they're cerebral thinkers, and I say that because I think Matt's a very cerebral thinker. And here's what I would say about Matt. So I told Matt on the phone one time, and I've heard him since say this in interviews, so I'm going to take credit for this. I told him, this is probably like a year ago. I told him, Matt, you got relieved of command before getting relieved of command was cool, right? And I was kind of joking, but I was also, the intent behind my little quip there was very sincere. And what I was saying was, Matt, you were ahead of us. Your foresight is what granted you the prescience to see what was happening in the military before we all saw it. Well, or at least he saw it to a degree that he was willing to speak out by writing a book. I mean, there's speaking out, and then there's, like writing a book. I mean, that's a whole new level of speaking out. And I credit both those guys with that, right? So, I mean, he wrote a book and he got relieved. He got relieved of command. So Matt had a very successful Air Force career. Then he goes into the Space Force. He was in command. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Space Force. He writes this book. The next thing you know, he gets relieved of command and he's out of the Space Force. I think he served about a total of 15 years. I might not be exactly right on that, but about 15 years of service altogether between his time in the Air Force and the Space Force. So Lieutenant Colonel, same rank in the Space Force that I was in the Army. And then Rob Green, also the same rank. So Rob Green, still in the Navy. He is a commander. A commander in the Navy is the same thing as a lieutenant colonel in the Army, or a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force or the Space Force, or the Marine Corps for that matter. So I give Matt a ton of credit. Like I said to Matt when I spoke to him on the phone, hey, you were ahead of us. You know, you got relieved of command before getting relieved of command was cool. He later kind of joked in an interview that, you know, someone had told him that on the phone, and so I want to take credit for that. That was me that told him that on the phone. That he, you know. Anyway, so I think the world of Matt. I think he's a great dude. If you hear him give interviews, he is a very cerebral thinker. You can tell that if you listen to him for 2 or 3 minutes, you can tell that he's a big brain guy. And I say that with all the credit in the world. I'm not dinging him for being somebody who's overly intellectual. No, that's not what I'm saying. He is a high-powered intellectual, but I'm not saying that in some sort of reductive way. I give him all the credit in the world for having foresight that a lot of us did not necessarily have. You know, so in that way, he was at the tip of the spear in a way that, I mean, I don't know anybody else who can kind of claim that the way that he can. So what's the book about? I told you that if you look at the subtitle, it's called Marxism's Goal of Conquest and the Unmaking of the American Military. So let's look at this, right? So we open it up. What does the introduction say? All right, I'm going to read just a section here, just in the introduction. This book is largely about Marxism, something that is ugly and which can even be appropriately associated with evil aims and ends. Okay, so very early on, we know that Matt Lohmeier doesn't just think that Marxism is at odds with American institutions and American aims. He actually thinks that Marxism is evil, okay? So it's not just that there's a difference in American systems or American ideals and then Marxist ideology, but he believes that Marxist ideology is evil. I concur 100% with that. Okay, let's skip a couple of lines. It begins with a discussion of the greatness of the American ideal. So this is talking about his book and how he lays it out. So what he's going to do is and Rob Green is very similar in this regard. And to be honest, both these books resonate strongly with me because they both talk a lot about the American Republican principles, and that's Republican with a lowercase r, American Republican principles that our country was founded upon. You know, whether we talk about the War for Independence, whether we talk about the the Declaration of Independence itself, the ideals that went into the construction and the ratification of the Constitution. Marxism as an ideology is a direct attack on those ideals. And so that's the way, that is the framework in which Matt Lohmeier is writing his book. And I completely concur. Rob will also rely heavily on quotations from the founding fathers. Both of these guys do that. You know, I'm kind of a hobby historian, I guess, you know. And I'm a big fan of the founding fathers as well. So again, that resonates strongly with me. I think that is one. I think it's smart to frame their books that way, but I also think it tells a story that has to be told. So if we move forward, we kind of understand how he's going to make his argument, right? That, hey, Marxism is an attack on Americanism and even an attack on the military, right? So he'll go on. This book is my best effort to participate in that concerted effort to better educate ourselves and our people about the scope of the problem of dangerous ideologies that threaten to undermine our nation, our Constitution, and our way of life. So, you know, he lets us know up front exactly why he is writing this book and why he has taken the time and why he took the risks that he did to write this book while in uniform, right? He also has an extremely interesting perspective. So that was the introduction I was reading from. If we just look at chapter 1, two things jump out. One is he opens with a quotation from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. So if you don't know who Solzhenitsyn is, Solzhenitsyn was a Soviet dissident, and he was born in the like the extremely early days of like at the tail end of World War I, basically the very, very early days of the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviet Union. And notwithstanding that, he was born into a very devout Russian Orthodox family. Fast forward a generation, now he's a young officer in the Red Army in World War II, and he kind of denounces Christianity. I mean, this is during World War II in the Soviet Union. So like most people around him, he kind of embraced Marxism, atheism. He's an officer in the Red Army. Anyway, at some point he gets arrested because he criticized Stalin, and he goes to the Gulag for I think 8 years. Anyway, at some point he also he has cancer, so he's got these health issues he's working through. He kind of reconverts back to Christianity. Remember, he had been born in an Orthodox, like a devout Russian Orthodox Christian family. So he kind of goes through this phase of atheism and then returns to Christianity. So he just has a fascinating life. But I'm a big Solzhenitsyn fan, so it also resonates with me that this quotation from Solzhenitsyn is used to open up his first chapter. But Solzhenitsyn is a fascinating man, like just his life, right? His journey through life. I think he died about 15 years ago, but he's also a very well-known author, and he wrote quite a few books, but probably the most well-known is a 3-volume series known as the Gulag Archipelago, right? Okay, good. So what does Solzhenitsyn say that Matt has included at the beginning of this chapter? Quote, "We are approaching a major turning point in world history, in the history of civilization. It is a juncture at which settled concepts suddenly become hazy, lose their precise contours, at which our familiar and commonly used words lose their meaning, become empty shells, and methods which have been reliable for many centuries no longer work." Okay, this is important. Why? When you're talking about Marxism, you are talking about something that is predicated upon opposition and oppositionalism. I'm not even sure if oppositionalism is a word, but I'm going to use it. And what I mean by that is Marxism. So a lot of Americans probably only have a caricatured understanding of Marxism. And, oh, what's Marxism? And they're going to say communism, class struggle. And that may be all they have. Okay, if that's the extent of your understanding, let's start there. But we probably need to build on that a little bit. In which case, this book is a great reference because it'll help you understand Marxism better without being like a philosophy textbook, So Marxism is predicated upon that struggle. So the idea of opposition is inherent in Marxism, and it's oppositional to the order that is in place. So if you want to talk about American systems and American ideals, Marxism, of course, has to critique that and has to be destructive towards that. Okay. And it's going to do that through these situated struggles, which is where you would get your idea of class struggle, et cetera. Another thing that I just want to mention about chapter 1 here is another reason why Matt's book is really interesting is because he's got a cool perspective, a broader perspective than a lot of Americans have. And he opens up chapter 1 by explaining how he took a trip while he was a cadet at the Air Force Academy. He took a trip to China to visit the Chinese Air Force Academy. So the People's Liberation Army Air Force Academy. So I'm not going to go more into that, but it's just an interesting detail about how just some of the perspectives that he has had. Okay. He does mention Orwell in chapter 1, which, +1 from me, because I kind of believe that we live in a dystopian world right now. So I'm in agreement with him drawing attention to some of the Orwellian concepts behind, thought crime, if you will. Okay, but let's move on. So a little bit later in the book, in chapter 3 is entitled Marxism and Revolution. But this is a great chapter, especially if you need a little bit of education on Marxism and what the true danger of Marxism is. Above and beyond just this book talking about Marxism effects, destructive effects on the military, it's also a pretty good education on Marxism, again, without being like a super dense philosophy textbook. And I think this is critical. Like I have to give him so much credit for the way that he describes some of this history. And I'm going to tell you why. So he's going to mention something here, and I think it was pretty brave of him to do this, but I also think that his book would have been a little incomplete if he had not included this. And you're gonna know what I mean when I say this. So let me read a little bit here. Okay, quote: in 1776, a private reading club was formed in Bavaria, roughly modern Germany, by an obscure academic by the name of Adam Weishaupt. The private club, referred to by Weishaupt himself as a secret society, lasted officially for little more than a decade. All right, I'm going to skip down a little bit. Okay, secret society, which came to be known as the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati. All right. You can't mention a word like the Illuminati without just, explaining what we're talking about. Now, he's going to go on and he's going to say, when encountering the word Illuminati, it is perhaps necessary to temporarily suspend any healthy skepticism one may have acquired, whether from fictionalized Dan Brown novels or elsewhere on the internet. Okay. As he said, the Illuminati is the name of a group that was founded by Adam Weishaupt, who I think was a professor of canon law at Ingolstadt University, if I remember that correctly. But it was founded on May 1st, 1776. Some of you will immediately understand the significance of May 1st. Right? The Illuminati is an organization that was founded, and like he said, was only in existence for about a decade or so. That's what the conventional story would tell us. Is that true? Is that not true? Hey, listen, I'm not here to say. But even if that original order became defunct within a decade of its founding, the term has kind of been used as an umbrella term for secret societies that have branched out over the last couple of centuries and infiltrated other secret societies, etc. The extent to which that happens, of course, is up for debate. But a lot of times when people say the Illuminati nowadays, they're using it as a cover term. It gets misused a lot. Its meaning gets stretched and expanded a lot. But it can either be kind of that cover term for secret societies that kind of exist in an octopus-like fashion that have, extended their tentacles and infiltrated other groups. Or it can mean this very specific organization founded by Adam Weishaupt that supposedly, went defunct about a decade later. That original society's relationship to Marxism is important, and I'm glad that he mentions that. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that in there because I give him a ton of credit for mentioning that. But we're gonna move on. The fact that he mentions, Freemasonry, also, I have to give him a ton of credit. He's going to mention a couple of other names here, and we're not going to talk a lot about these guys. That's not the objective of tonight. what I'm doing is I want you to know that he gives some very good detail in this book that I think is necessary. So I'm going to read a sentence here. The two other bridge makers between the Illuminists, so that would be, the people of the Illuminati, and Marx are Thomas Robert Malthus and George W.F. Hegel. Okay. Thomas Robert Malthus. If you've ever heard of Malthusianism, I mean, that comes from Malthus. And I'm not going to talk a lot about him, but typically when people mention Malthusianism, they're talking about like ideas of, depopulation, because that's a lot of what Malthus spoke about. In fact, a paragraph down, Matt mentions Malthus put his thoughts to paper in his essay on the principles of population. So anyway, draw your own conclusions or look up Malthus. So Hegel. Okay, who's Hegel? A page later, he's going to actually mention the Hegelian dialectic. So some of you, I've been talking about the Hegelian dialectic for like 15 years, 16 years probably. So, and I've written about it. I wrote a piece on my Substack about it as well. I think the piece was maybe called Information, Dialectic, and Deception, something like that maybe. I can't remember exactly what title I put on it. But, and I mentioned the Hegelian dialectic. So Hegel, some people, and I'm not even going to pretend to be an expert on Hegel. I'm not even an expert on philosophy, much less on Hegel. And Hegel's considered to be the perhaps the most difficult of all Western philosophers to read. His reading or his writing is considered to be almost, unintelligible because of the convoluted way in which he writes, and he kind of attributes his own definitions to certain words rather than kind of employing words with the conventionally used definition. So he's just incredibly difficult to understand. But you don't necessarily have to understand. If you just need a cursory understanding of why Hegel is important when it comes to Hegelian dialectic, you don't have to understand the intricacies of Hegelian philosophy. And you don't even have to understand, some of the Hermeticism upon which some of Hegel's ideas were premised. You don't necessarily have to understand all of that. Just understanding, in a general sense, the Hegelian dialectic and how it can be used in a positive way, but then also how it could be engineered in a fabricated construct to manipulate opinion. Just kind of understanding that is already helpful. So what's the Hegelian dialectic? And Matt talks about it briefly, but you're going to have this oppositional construct between two opposing ideas or concepts or notions, and one of them is called the thesis. Its opposite is the antithesis or antithesis. The interplay of those two with one another produces a synthesis. That synthesis in turn can become a new thesis, which then is put into opposition with a new antithesis, producing yet again another synthesis, and that process can continue onward. Anyway, Marx used some Hegelian thought, and it's important. You don't have to be an expert in all of this, but it's important to understand some of those concepts as to why Marx felt that was important. And I think Matt does a great job at explaining that without getting lost in a bunch of concepts that like nobody's going to understand. Even me, I'm not even going to pretend to be, like I said, I'm not an expert on Hegel. I'm not even an expert on philosophy. I'm like a hobby philosopher, just like I'm like a hobby historian. That's it. I'm not even a very good hobby philosopher. I just pretend to be. Okay, so Communist Manifesto, he speaks about it. We're not going to talk about that. Most people have heard of the Communist Manifesto. This book it's just a fantastic book. And I'm gonna end here with something that he wrote at the very end. So there's a paragraph here called "Get Educated." Okay, And it's in a subsection here towards the end that is called Averting the Wrath to Come. And he says, get educated, learn about American history from the best books. By doing this, you will come to appreciate the greatness of America's founding ideas and ideals, the timelessness of the American philosophy found in the Declaration of Independence, the wisdom and beauty of our limited form of government as codified in the Constitution, and the inalienability of your natural rights as a U.S. citizen as further enumerated in the Bill of Rights. If you are not sure where to begin, consult the short recommended reading list at the end of the book. Okay, so get the book so you can see his reading list. So why do I think this book is so great? What I didn't necessarily talk about, because I think it's kind of understood with the title and the subtitle, is he's going to talk about the founding. He's going to talk about Marxism and how Marxism, borrows from some of these other concepts before it. And, he even mentions like the philosophy of, so he mentions Jacques Derrida, the founder of deconstruction. He mentions postmodernism. So some of these important concepts where people have heard of these concepts, they may not necessarily know what they are. And he's going to give you enough of a background on them to then understand when he starts talking about why is the pitch for diversity in the military so potentially dangerous, or the 1619 Project. Why do we need to be careful about what that may necessarily entail or include, right? Or why should we, like, what's the real problem with critical race theory, right? He's going to explain all of that, but it's not just going to be a superficial explanation, because he's going to couch it in terms of Marxism, and he's going to explain why Marxism is so antithetical to American ideas. That's why I think it's incredible that he focuses so much on like the Constitution and founding principles of the country. And in theory, the military should be like a bastion of American ideals, right? It's a real problem if it no longer is. So again, that's Irresistible Revolution by Matthew Lohmeier. Okay, so this one, Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines. The subtitle is A Story of Hope for Those Who Love Liberty. Again, the author is Robert A. Greene, Jr. So let's open this up, right? So he says here, like right in the preface, this book will tell the story of a silenced minority who faced significant challenges with faith and courage. Now, this book is about those who stood up to the COVID-19 vaccine, it's not really a vaccine, mandate. So Matt's book is kind of before all that happened. So, May 2021, that's Matt's book. Matt's book is not particular to COVID or the vaccine debacle. Rob's book is, okay? So Rob's book, but again, just in the opening pages, again, mentions the Constitution. The Constitution is the bedrock and founding document establishing the construct, the rule of law, and the civilization we have built as Americans. So both these guys relying heavily on the founding fathers, as they should be. I mean, these guys are true. So Matt and Rob, what I would say about them is, and this is important, these guys are the true descendants, and I don't necessarily mean by blood, right? But these guys are the true descendants of the founding fathers and those who have, put on the uniform and fought for freedom beforehand. Not these senior officers that are, LARPing as military officers right now. I mean, come on. Yeah, they might be wearing stars, but those guys are a disgrace. I mean, they just are. Who are the true leaders? These guys, Matt Lohmeier, Rob Greene, the guys who risked it all. I mean, Matt lost his career. Rob was prepared to lose his career. I don't know. I mean, maybe he will because of this book. I hope he doesn't. He's still in uniform as of right now, but I mean, he knew what he was risking, and he details that in the book. I mean, he's a father of 7. You know, he knew he could lose his career or worse. I mean, he talks about that. So what I want to do in this book, and again, just lots of quotations here from the founding fathers, which I think is critical. There are only few people in our military right now who have any business quoting the founding fathers, but Rob is one of those who can, you know. So what I like about this book is he names names, which took a lot of courage for him to do, and I'm glad he did. So he mentions a lot of people in this book. So when I say he names names, I mean he names the names of senior military officials who deserve to be called out for going along with the unlawful mandate. And I've written a lot on my Substack as to why the mandate was unlawful. He explains exactly why it's unlawful in this book. So if you've heard that and you don't exactly know why, read this book because he'll explain it. I'm not going to go into that right now. But what I am going to go into is a couple of cases of other individuals that he draws attention to, because these are important. So he mentions here a case of a guy who I've also had a lot of contact with, and in fact, he interviewed me a couple of months ago, and that is Lieutenant Mark Bashaw from the United States Army. He's out of the Army now. And Mark Bashaw, also another courageous individual. And he stood up. So first of all, he refused to take the injection, but he also spoke up about the masking and the testing, because those also were only ever under EUA, emergency use authorization. Everybody forgets that. So, he didn't want to consent to the testing or the masking either. Anyway, he ends up getting court-martialed. And this is extremely important. This is a little bit nuanced, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but Rob Green, what he explains about Mark Bashaw's court-martial is incredible and eye-opening, and I was not aware of it until I read this book. So I'm not going to go through it because I don't want to steal Rob's thunder. I want you to read the book. But Rob was present at Mark Bashaw's court-martial, and Rob caught the judge. I guess the best way to put it would be misquoting the law and subverting a part of the law which very clearly states that it is a requirement for individuals to be made aware or informed of the option to accept or refuse the administration of emergency use authorized products or emergency use authorization products. So anyway, I don't want to, this is a little bit complex, so I'm just going to leave it there. Let me just restate that so hopefully people understand kind of what I'm saying, but read the book to get the full story. Too nuanced for me to go through here, but Rob, so in the law that governs the use of emergency use authorization products, the law clearly states that basically informed consent, you must be informed of that you have the option to accept or decline the product because it's under emergency use authorization. However, the judge basically misquoted the law and misquoted a required condition of the law as an additional condition of the law. And therefore he said, not that you shall inform, potential recipients of their option to accept or decline. Instead of that being a requirement, he's basically said that it was optional. So instead of saying that, you shall inform them, he said you may inform them. And he emphasized that this was a may. So it was a condition that's not required, but it is required by law. So if I'm not explaining that very well, just understand that it's a little bit of nuance there. I want you to read the book, but understanding that is incredible because it goes into how court martials were being held and judges were either intentionally, or if it wasn't intentional, then I don't even know what the other explanation would be. Then, he just doesn't understand the law. He can't read. I don't know. But in any case, so I think that judge's name is, let me make sure I get this correct. That judge's name is Judge Robert Cohen. So, okay, Judge Robert Cohen, which is it? So were you intentionally misleading everyone as to what the law actually says, or do you not understand the law? And what have you done since this court martial to correct your misreading of the law? What is it, Judge Robert Cohen? Okay, there's another case here that I want to talk about really quickly in this book because it's, again, super important. And that is the case of, let's see here. That's the case of Billy Mosley. And I had the page marked. Here we go. Okay. So Navy Lieutenant Billy Mosley. So Mark Bashaw and I have had contact, and so have Billy Mosley and I. We've had a little bit of contact too. So, so Mosley, lieutenant in the Navy, and he was forced to endure a separation board because he refused to go through with the mandate, the vaccine mandate, right? And I'm going to read this here. So it says, at Lieutenant Mosley's May 20th, 2022 separation board, the panel, consisting of 3 naval officers, were convinced by the evidence that the Navy's order to be vaccinated with an experimental COVID-19 vaccine was not a lawful order. Okay, so we have a court-martial in the Army which finds Bashaw guilty. Now, he's not given any additional punishment, but he is found guilty. But it's because the judge misreads the law governing emergency use authorization products. Here, we have a panel that seems to understand that the mandate was actually unlawful. So they seem to have a clear understanding of the law and therefore understand that the mandate was not in alignment with that law. So they have a better understanding than the judge did in Mark Bashaw's court-martial. All right, I'm going to continue reading. They determined that Mosley had not committed misconduct by declining the COVID-19 vaccine. They also voted unanimously to retain Lieutenant Mosley in the naval service. So then he's going to quote R. Davis Younts, who is the attorney for Billy Mosley, Lieutenant Mosley. So Younts, Mosley's attorney, issued a press release the next day in which he detailed how, quote, Lieutenant Mosley risked his 22-year career and his military retirement because of his faith and his commitment to his oath, unquote. Now, because this is just an admin separation board, it cannot establish legal precedent. However, Younts expressed hope that this groundbreaking case sends a strong message to the Department of Defense. What a strong message? That the mandate was unlawful. So these two cases that Rob Green gives significant detail on are important. We have Mark Bashaw's case where the judge gives the wrong decision because he either doesn't understand the law or he's intentionally misreading and therefore misleading everyone about the law. And then we also have a Navy separation board that does understand the law, concedes that the mandate was unlawful, and therefore decides that Billy Mosley was not, therefore, he had not committed misconduct by refusing to go along with the mandate because it was an unlawful order. Okay, great. So the last case that I want to talk about, and this is why Rob Greene's book is so great. I mean, he talks about his story, but then he gives these personal stories of these other individuals that nobody would have heard of. So I was aware of Mark Bashaw's case. I was somewhat aware of Billy Mosley's case. But this one that I'm going to tell you about, which is my favorite part of the book, I did not know of at all until I read this book. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that this absolutely was my favorite part of the book. And it's a story about a young man. And I was so impressed by this story that I actually reached out to Rob and I was like, hey, who is this, who is this young man that you tell this story about? Because, I want to, if at all possible, I'd like to, just contact him. So Rob put me in contact with him. I spoke to him on the phone and I just congratulated him for being more courageous than every single one of our currently serving generals and admirals, every single one of them. So who is this young man that I'm talking about? His name is Seaman Recruit Owen. All right. So what is this story? And again, it's my favorite part of the whole book. So Rob tells us a story about a young man named Seaman Recruit Owen, who signed up to join the Navy before the vaccine was mandated for the military. Okay. Mandate comes out and he is told by his recruiters that he's going to be able to request a religious accommodation upon arrival at boot camp. All right. So he shows up at Recruit Training Command in Great Lakes. And because, of course, Seaman Recruit Owen is unvaccinated, he goes through a 2-week quarantine that all unvaccinated recruits were forced to endure. Of course, they pressure him to take the shot. He won't take it. And at one point, Rob tells us one of the medical counselors told Owen that, quote, people like you are the reason we're still in this pandemic, unquote. So first of all, that's ridiculous. Whoever said this is a complete moron. And anyway, I'm just going to leave it at that. But what I would say to Seaman Recruit Owen is, no, this person who told you that is a complete idiot. You, Seaman Recruit Owen, it's people like you that are the only reason that we have any rights left whatsoever in this country, because the vast majority of Americans rolled over. They believed whatever they were told. Vast majority of the people in the military did the exact same thing. But you, Seaman Recruit Owen, have more courage than almost anybody else, including our generals and admirals, most of whom are, complete cowards. So Seaman Recruit Owen, you are a hero. But let me explain why, because the story doesn't end there, right? So, let me personalize this for a moment. I was a battalion commander, right? And I had to, it was hard for me to stand up and do the right thing. I was never going to take the shot, but I know what it's like to have to kind of stare down the entire army. But I was a lieutenant colonel when I did so. Imagine being a seaman recruit. I'm assuming he's 18 years old, has no idea what the procedures are in the army or how he's even supposed to really go about trying to get a religious accommodation. Just infinitely harder for him than it would be in the situation that I was in. So Rob tells us, Seaman Owen recruit asked to speak to a Navy chaplain, not knowing that a chaplain interview was the first step in filing a religious accommodation request. In violation of numerous Navy regulations and basic constitutional rights, Owen's request to speak to a Navy chaplain was completely ignored. Okay, so long story short, they discharged this guy who has just showed up for boot camp, trying to join the Navy. Rob goes on to tell us, Owen served honorably for 39 days before he was finally sent home. His constitutional rights denied and his religious beliefs unsupported. So Seaman Recruit Owen served in the Navy for 39 days. That's it. So that's my favorite part of the book. And I wrote something on my Substack. I can't remember which piece it was, but I drew I decided I was going to compare and contrast one of the most courageous individuals that I know of in uniform, which is, Seaman Recruit Owen, was somebody who I think is a complete coward, which is Major General Julian Alford from the Marine Corps. And his story's out there, so I'm not disclosing any information that's that I should not be privy to. It's out there, but General Alford is the I believe he was the commander of Marine Training Command. Anyway, he took the COVID-19 shot, suffered a fairly significant injury, and then subsequently still kicked out, by his count, 500 Marines for not taking the shot. So you have a gentleman who is injured, and after being injured, and that injury occurred almost immediately after the shot, like the same day or within 1 day or so. There was no question in General Alford's mind that his injury was suffered from the shot. And then goes on. So he's told by the commandant of the Marine Corps to keep his mouth shut about it. He does. And then he then kicks out 500 Marines because they wouldn't take a shot that he knew could injure them like it had injured him. Complete coward. Now, to his credit, I got to give him a little bit of credit. He has allowed some information to come out. That's how we know that he was injured, and he says it broke his heart to kick all these Marines out, but, he's enjoying his 2-star retirement. He's just a complete coward. So I'm sympathetic to the general that he's injured. I hate that for him. I hate it. And I do believe that he feels bad for kicking out these Marines, but it's just not enough. It's not enough. He turned his back on his country, turned his back on the Marine Corps. He turned his back on these 500 young Marines who he kicked out. And to be honest, in my mind, he undid a lot of the good that he did throughout his 30-plus year career. And my understanding is that he was considered to be kind of a Marine's Marine. He had a spectacular career for 30 years. And then, these are my words, but he kind of ended it in disgrace. So when I wrote a Substack piece, I kind of drew a comparison between these two individuals where I said, you've got an individual whose career is measured in as many years as this other individual's service time was measured in days, 30 plus years to 39 days. You've got, a commander, someone who commanded who knows how many thousands of Marines throughout his entire career. And then you have a seaman recruit who's in charge of nobody. You have a gentleman, I don't know, he's probably 50, right? And then, an 18-year-old, but the seaman recruit stands up against the entire Navy and makes the right decision and gets sent home after 39 days, as opposed to this general who's now, enjoying his retirement. And the final line that I put in that Substack that I wrote was in a military full of Major Generals Alford, be a seaman recruit Owen. So anyway, but I only know about that story because of this fantastic book. So this book, first of all, I really like the title, Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines, because what Rob Greene is telling us is those who actually defended the Constitution while in uniform, they were they were behind enemy lines. They were in the military, which is supposed to, support and defend the Constitution, but collectively had turned its back on it. And the only people holding the line were individuals like Rob Greene, like seaman recruit Owen. So anyway, these two books, again, Irresistible Revolution by Matt Lohmeier and Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines by Rob Greene. Read them both. If you have any affiliation with the military whatsoever, you got to read these books. If you have a son or a daughter in the military, or your spouse, sibling, if you're in Congress, you need to read these books to understand from the perspective of those who lived it exactly what was going on. If you still, 2 years later, do not understand that the mandate was unlawful, you need to read Rob Greene's book. Now, last recommendation, you need to read both these books. I would recommend that you read Rob's first. I think it's slightly more accessible, very easy read, but still information dense in a good way. Matt's is a little bit tougher of a read, and that is not a knock on Matt, nor is it to say that Rob's book is simplistic. Not at all. All I'm saying is Matt's book is a little bit more philosophical, slightly less accessible. However, to Matt's credit, he takes information, or he takes topics that are not easily spoken about and does his best to make them as accessible as possible. And I think he's successful in doing that. So read both books. They're both fully endorsed by me. That doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with everything in these books. Like in Matt's, Matt has a slightly he has different historical interpretations than I do. I don't need to go into those. It's not important. Anybody who's familiar with some of the things that I believe or have written about or spoken about before would probably know what those are. None of those are, when it comes to the fundamentals, Matt and I are in alignment. Like I said, there are some interpretations of historical events or whatever where I might quibble with him, but again, I'm so much in alignment with him that I fully endorse the book. I don't know anybody that I agree 100% with, and I don't even know that the me of today would agree 100% with the me of 6 months ago. So with that said, read these books and get the word out after you read them to encourage others to read them as well. Thank you.